One of the types of jobs that I really enjoy is working with hospitals. This particular job was a crucifix for a hospital in Grand Rapids, and they were more of a leading edge hospital that wanted to break out of their traditional shell and be a little bit more avant-garde. So they wanted to have a crucifix made for the main lobby that was a little bit more retro and a little more modern. A large portion of the sculptures that I make start out in the hot shop, and this is the start of this particular crucifix for a hospital in Grand Rapids. And I've got a molten gather glass, and I'm making the Marini, and you need to start ahead of time because Marini is made hot out of the molten glass, and it has to be annealed for several days, and then it needs to be cold worked and sliced up almost like a loaf of bread. So you need to get this stuff going early on in the job because there's so much cold work and fabrication that doesn't happen in the hot shop. So these particular Marinis are multiple layers of green and orange, and I'm gathering glass and adding different coats of color onto the surface of the glass, and then letting it cool down and gathering more glass over that so that I have this layered effect. This particular piece is the first gather, and I've gathered the molten glass and added the color, and I've got to get it to the right shape and let it cool down so that I have a nice steady base to gather molten glass on top of that. The whole process of glass blowing is one gather after another gather. You can only get so much glass in one gather, just kind of like molten honey. You can only get so much on the honey dipper. The glory hole that I'm reheating the piece in is cooking at about 2,500 degrees, and that is going to allow me to superheat my final gather and stretch it out about 2.5 feet long. I'm getting ready to take my second gather of the Marini, and you definitely want to make sure you have the right size gather. So I'm going to drain the gather into a small bucket of water, and that's going to give me a nice uniform size so that I know that when I take my third gather, I'll get the exact amount of glass I need to get about 30 inches in length out of this Marini and about maybe 2.5 inches in diameter. Adding more color onto the surface of the glass, which is part of the layering effect. And the color itself is pretty interesting. One of the coolest things I think about glass is that there are no man-made substances that change the color of the glass. It's all earthly elements from the periodic table. So different elements like copper makes blue, iron makes green, different minerals make different colors in glass, and that is something that is really eclectically different about this particular craft. So rolling the glass on that steel plate shapes the glass, but more importantly, it chills the surface of the glass so that when I'm stretching the glass out, it has a nice strong surface tension on it so that I don't just lose it and it melts and completely falls on the floor. Gather number 4. This is going to create the layering process in the interior of the Marini. So like I said earlier, when we slice this up like a loaf of bread, when you flip that slice down flat on the table, you'll see every gather of clear crystal and color laid in there within the glass Marini. And that is what's going to make this particular piece look so unique. That people are going to want to get up close to this crucifix and experience it up close so they can see those layers and they know that there's more than just the shape of the cross. Just like religion, there's a lot of depth there. Well, a lot of depth in this cross is going to be color and particular shape and style to it. So dipping the end of the glass into water chills the little ball that I've created on the end, so I have something to hang on to when I'm stretching it out. I get it screaming hot, and I'm going to use the diamond shears, and I'm going to grab a hold of it, and I'm going to let this piece lengthen out using gravity, but then also stretching it with the diamond shears. It's a little bit fatter at the bottom end, so I'm going to go up with that and let that mass even out so I get a fairly uniform Marini pull. Now this piece is much too long to go back into the heat source and heat up. So really what I'm doing now is I'm letting the piece completely cool down so it's not moving at all. And then I'm going to add water to the surface of the neck, which is the part that's closest to the end of the blowpipe. And once I add that water to the neck, I'll be able to knock the piece off and break it literally off the blowpipe. And then I'll be able to put it in the annealing oven, which will cool it down with Marini probably about 24 hours. The thicker the glass, the longer you have to anneal it, and I know that I'm going to be cold working and diamond sawing this particular glass, so I want to have it not have any stress in it, because when you're diamond sawing it, if there is stress, you'll get chips and shards that'll come off of it. So there's the finished piece right there, getting ready to go into the annealing oven, and we're going to get ready to start using the diamond saw a few days from now. The annealing oven is sitting at about 1,000 degrees, and that's what's going to anneal the glass from 1,000 degrees to room temperature over that 24-hour period. That's something that all molten glass needs to be done. It all needs to be annealed over that length of time. So after the glass has gotten out of the annealing oven and has become stable without stressing it, that's when I start cutting the Marinis into the slices I was describing earlier. This is about a 16-inch diamond saw, and it's a wet saw with diamonds on the edge of the saw. It's a really interesting type of saw because you can put your hand right up against the blade and it won't cut your hand, but when you go up against something hard, you can cut a brick, a regular cinder block, or you can cut glass. Anything hard, it'll break right through it and cut right through it. So you see how I'm slicing this large piece of Marini I pulled out. I'll probably get about 15 or 20 pieces of Marini off of one pull. I really think that the transformation between a long blown piece of glass into these Marini shapes is something that really excites me with the pieces that I'm working on. And I also really enjoy polishing them out. You know, this is a diamond wheel, and after you cut the Marini, you've got a very, very rough cut edge on that surface, and to make it beautiful to the eye, you need to go through a process where you're polishing it out through several grits. And this is a very long and painstaking process, but I enjoy it because it's very meditative. Once they're polished out to almost a high polish, I put them in an annealing oven and I line them up into the pattern that I want, and then I heat them up to about 1500 degrees and I fuse them and melt them so they get a little bit of natural posture to them. Now that we've got the Marinis cut and polished out and ready to go, it's time to start working on the wood. And I think I enjoy working on the wood about as much as I do working with the glass. You know, different materials in different projects really keeps the artistic flow totally diversified. So you see I have this African mahogany cross cut out, but that surface is not the finished surface. I'm going to want to patuto that with a special tool that I kind of developed that carves these facets into the surface of the wood. I really, really love this technique with the wood because it's a very popular technique in Europe on the island of Murano, and it's called patuto, and they do this to the glass. But I've never seen anybody do it to wood. So incorporating this type of technique into the wood, I think gives it a very organic style. So using these finished Marini pieces, I've carved notches in the front surface of the cross so that each one of those one-of-a-kind Marinis fits in perfectly. This is something where they're about 1/4 inch down and they stick out about 1 inch to 1.5 inches on the surface, so there's a really nice three-dimensional quality to that. You know, once I had all the Marinis cut to fit into the surface of the wood and I finished patutoing it, this is when I started adding the final sealer on the surface of the mahogany. And that's something that just really makes the mahogany pop. I mean, it turned out amazing, and you can see when I put it in there, it just completely brings the grain to life. Now it's time to put the Marini in. And the Marini, I'm using a high volume silicone, 100% silicone, and I chose black because black allowed the back side of the Marini to completely disappear into a shadow into the core of that piece. And I think that really makes a big difference, because when the piece has light hitting it from different angles, it actually looks like it's illuminated. And I think on a crucifix, it's a really, really cool technique. Just putting the final touches on this. Once the silicone dries, I can go back in and clean up the edges with an X-Acto knife and get rid of any extra silicone, and you won't even see how those Marinis are held into the surface of the piece, which I think that the technical ability and the technical result of good technique is very important with sculpture. I really always try to make sure that things are clean and things are done very well. A lot of times when I make sculpture out of glass, wood, and other materials, I know the pieces that I really feel successful about because I don't want them to go. And this was one particularly that I was sorry to see go, because once it gets put in the hospital and it's 3 hours away, I hardly ever see it, and I don't go to that hospital, so it's gone, and I can reminisce at images. But when they let them go, it's like letting a little baby go. It's like, you pour all your heart and soul into it, and then, boom, it's gone, and the client's got the work. And this one, I definitely missed seeing it go.